Further on in my teaching of the module USA 1945 to 75 with my Year 10 GCSE history class, we came to focus on the civil rights movement of the 1950s and 1960s. When completing their assessments on the previous topic of the Red Scare, many of my pupils had struggled to recall and therefore use the specific contextual knowledge they needed when answering questions, as I had not been systematic enough in my use of retrieval. I reflected that I therefore needed to be more systematic both in identifying the key items of knowledge in this new topic that would underpin pupils' understandings, and in my use of regular retrieval practice throughout the topic to encode this knowledge in their long term memories. The main resource I used to teach this civil rights topic was the course textbook, which had a series of double page spreads similar to this one, focused on a key aspect of the movement. The bulk of time in the first lesson on each aspect was taken up reading one of these spreads and highlighting, clarifying, and summarizing the events, people, and concepts described. Therefore, I selected the key knowledge I wanted pupils to retain from these spreads when planning my lessons, cross referencing this with the exam specifications specific content to ensure that I was selecting the most important information. I could then write a series of low stakes quiz questions for each aspect of the topic, which in this example was a Supreme Court ruling in the case of Brown versus Board of Education that led to segregation in schools in the USA being declared unconstitutional. And I'll let you have a quick read of those. After the first lesson on this aspect, I set these questions as homework for the pupils to revise. Each subsequent lesson on this aspect then began with the same 10 to 15 questions. As you can see, the questions are quite detailed and only require short answers. This, combined with asking them in the same order each time, initially provided support for pupils to experience a high success rate when retrieving this information. The impact of this was clear, as you can see from this record of pupils' scores in the quizzes, where they go from scoring low on the left to scoring high on the right. I set the expectation that pupils would master 100% of this content during the sequence of lessons on this particular aspect, retesting specific pupils at break times and lunch times if necessary. Once this content was mastered, I was keen to ensure that both pupils retained it beyond the specific sequence of lessons in which they'd learnt it, and that I increased the challenge with practice and retrieval as their knowledge became more secure. To do this, I collapsed the knowledge covered in the original 10 quiz questions into a single task, which I asked pupils to complete at the end of two separate lessons on the next aspect of the topic, which was the Montgomery bus boycott. This task is less scaffolded than the set of quiz questions, requiring them to independently select the items of knowledge that would form the list of main events in the case. Secondly, to increase the challenge further, once we'd covered the entire section of events that made up the campaign for civil rights in the 1950s, I prompted pupils to recall the main events of the entire decade on a single timeline. This both increased the amount of knowledge pupils were asked to retrieve and again forced them to select and sequence a series of events independently. The effect of this use of retrieval was obvious in pupils' performance in their subsequent assessment. Where previously pupils had used little contextual knowledge in their answers, now they were able to draw on the knowledge of events, people, and concepts stored securely in their long term memory. The highlighted yellow text represents the specific contextual knowledge used by the same pupil in their previous assessment on the left, when little or no systematic retrieval was used, and in their post retrieval assessment on the right. And this effect was clear on the whole class level too, as the average pupil assessment score increased from around 45% in the assessment with little or no retrieval to just over 60% in the two assessments where retrieval was employed.